Hello, my name's Robert Baines. I am the president of the NATO Association of Canada, a charitable NGO dedicated to informing Canadians about the value, security, and the importance of NATO. This is something that most Canadians don't have to think about on a day-to-day basis. That's great, but it also leaves us open to the problem of taking what we have for granted. We want to make sure that Canadians don't do that. So in order to make sure that they don't, we put on events weekly through Zoom. We have articles. We engage on social media to make sure Canadians are constantly grappling with the different international issues of the day and understanding how important it is for Canada to be participating in the world as a member of the rules-based international order. Of course, to put all this together, we have an outstanding team, and I've got two of them today who are helping us to have this discussion with Brigadier General Wright. I'd like to briefly introduce Samer Khurshid. Thanks so much for joining us, Samer, and Victoria Heath, who is one of our senior research fellows at the NATO Association of Canada. Victoria, if I can ask you to introduce the General, and we'll start off the discussion.
Sure. Thank you so much, Robert. So I'm going to quickly give an introduction of the Brigadier General Wright, who enrolled in the Canadian Armed Forces in 1990 and joined Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry in 1994. Throughout his career, he has served in various staff positions within the Canadian Armed Forces, including Chief of Staff at the Canadian Forces Intelligence Command and Regimental Colonel of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry from 2014 to 2016. He holds an honors degree in History and Political Science and a Master's of Defense Studies from the Royal Military College and is a graduate of the National Security Program. There's a lot more on his resume, but I'm very happy to introduce him, and we're very pleased to have him speak with us today. Please take it over.
Okay, thank you very much, Victoria. And I am just going to put up the presentation. Okay, share right there, right? Okay, again, Victoria, thank you for the introduction, and Robert, thanks for the opening comments. And I just want to say I really appreciate what the NATO Association of Canada does in terms of keeping the discourse open on some very important issues. I'm just going to open the presentation. There we go. So plan on talking for about 30 to 40 minutes here. I'll just give a little bit of background just to add on to what Victoria said. So this mission here, I'll obviously be speaking about that in detail, but I have experience on NATO operations. So the first experience being in 1997 and 2002 in Bosnia, working with the Stabilization Force. And then my last full tour was actually in 2006, 2007, working under the International Security Assistance Force in Kandahar province. So some good experience with NATO, and one of the things that I'll be discussing here is how we're supporting the NATO mission in Iraq, which is currently commanded by a Canadian Major General, Jenny Carignan. So the agenda for my presentation over the next 30 or so minutes, I'm going to start with an overview. It's been about 6 years since Operation Impact began. So I'm going to go over very quickly the evolution of the mission over that 6-year period, and then really focus in on the last 9 months, because there have been some significant developments over the past 9 months, not only here within the region, but as you all know, the reason why we're doing this by Zoom is some developments in the world that have very much changed the way that we do things and why we do it. Then I'll be moving on to discuss some of the dynamics in the region. The majority, the focus of the presentation will actually be to give you an idea of what our soldiers, sailors, and aviators are doing here in the Middle East. I'll take the opportunity then to discuss some opportunities and some challenges. And then at the end, I believe there are some questions, although we're not live. I think there's some questions that you already have ready to go that I'll be able to address. So the seeds of Op Impact were actually planted almost exactly 6 years ago. It was over the late spring and the summer of 2014 that Daesh ran through Iraq and Syria. That led to the large-scale collapse of the Iraqi security forces and the declaration of a caliphate by Daesh. Canada first became involved at the beginning of August in 2014, and that was for the delivery of aid to the Yazidis who were under siege on Sinjar Mountain. So the first couple of months, really from August until the end of September, were focused on the delivery of aid. At that time, I was the J3, so in charge of planning for operations of our Canadian Joint Operations Command in Ottawa. So we were working with options to present through the Chief of the Defense Staff to the government. And what ultimately came about in October of 2014 were two additional lines of effort from the delivery of aid. The first one was Special Forces. I won't speak to that because that's under a separate chain of command, so I'm not going to really talk to that, although our Special Forces have been involved since 2014. And then Op Impact, the Op Impact, which I have inherited, began as a very air-heavy mission, very air power centric. So it included 6 of our CF-18 fighter jets, 2 of our CP-140 Auroras, which were used for overland surveillance and reconnaissance. And as well, we had one of our air-to-air refuelers, which provided support to the International Coalition Combined Joint Task Force Op Inherent Resolve, which still exists to this day. And I'll be discussing Op Inherent Resolve in a little bit more detail later. We also, at that point, had a number of officers and staff who were put in key positions in coalition headquarters, specifically looking at intelligence and targeting. And the positions in the headquarters is something that has endured in varying numbers up until today. The command and control for Operation Impact since the beginning has been based here at Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait. And the reason for that was in 2013, an operational support hub had been established here in Kuwait. So Canadian Joint Operations Command was in the process of standing up a number of operational support hubs around the globe to be better poised to support operations. And the stand-up of the operational support hub for Southwest Asia here in Kuwait was very timely because it provided an excellent staging base for the headquarters of the operation in 2014. So it was in October of 2014, right around Thanksgiving actually, that the air mission deployed. And I mentioned 2 other dates in October of 2014. The first one, and you'll see the picture up on the screen, the 22nd of October was when Warrant Officer Patrice Vincent was killed outside of the base in Saint-Jean, Quebec. And then the following day was the tragic shooting at the National War Memorial of Nathan Cirillo. So it definitely gave a sense of purpose to the initial soldiers, sailors, and aviators that were sent here on Operation Impact. In early 2015, the area of operations expanded into Syria. It had initially involved only being in Iraq, and it was in March of 2015 that the third photo on the screen there, an operator from the Special Forces, Sergeant Andrew Doyen, was killed while in operations in Iraq. In 2016, the air campaign, or Canada's contribution or role in the air campaign ceased, but that was also the year that the Government of Canada released a 5-year Middle East strategy, specifically looking at Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. And when we sent home the air assets, we increased our footprint in some of the headquarters, in our medical capabilities, in intelligence, and also in mentoring, providing the first leadership for what was then known as the Ministerial Liaison Team in Baghdad. 2017, Iraqi security forces, with the help of the coalition, liberated Mosul. Also in Syria, Daesh lost Raqqa, which was the center of gravity for them in Syria. and the Iraqi security forces declared the territory fully liberated from Daesh. That year for the mission, we started to get back in a little bit more on the air side by deploying some CC-130 Hercules transport aircraft, as well as some of our Griffin helicopters. Right around that time as well, we'd stood up the Canadian training assistance teams in both Jordan and Lebanon. And it was over the course of 2018, 2019, that those Canadian training assistance teams started to be folded into, and then in 2019, firmly came under the command of Operation Impact. At that same time, we were starting to get more involved in capacity building in Iraq. So a lot more Canadian Army soldiers were being involved with that. And in late 2018 was a stand-up of the NATO training mission in Iraq, or NMI, which was commanded at first by Major General Danny Fortin, and then since last November has been commanded by Major General Jenny Carignan. In 2019, March 2019 was when the government extended Operation Impact until the end of March 2021. And so we are now working through, into about the last 6 months of that 2-year mandate extension, and discussions as to what the future of Operation Impact will be happening later on this year. So that brings me to the last 9 or 10 months, which have been a very interesting time around the world, but then specifically in the Middle East. So in the fall of 2019, there were increasing indirect fire attacks on a number of coalition bases in Iraq. And these indirect fire attacks were being perpetrated by Iranian-aligned Shia militia groups. A series of events started really on the 28th of December with the death of a US contractor at the K-1 Air Force Base in Iraq. The following day, I think, is when a lot of people in Canada would have started seeing on the various news networks. There was US retaliation on some of the Iranian-aligned Shia militia group facilities in Iraq and in Syria. And then on the 31st of December, there was a lot of exposure to the large-scale protests that were happening outside of the US Embassy in Baghdad in the Green Zone. Start to the new year, on the 3rd of January was a US drone strike in Baghdad that killed the leader of the Quds Force, the Iranian Quds Force, General Soleimani, as well as al-Muhandis, who was the commander of one of the largest and the most capable Iranian-aligned Shia militia groups. Over the next few days, a couple pretty important things happened for where we are right now. One was that there was a non-binding vote in the Iraqi parliament to have US forces leave Iraq. And the second one was, in the media, people started paying attention to a new virus that had emerged, which we all obviously know now as COVID-19. The 8th of January, obviously a date that a lot of Canadians will remember. Iranian missiles targeted coalition bases in Iraq, and then tragically, there was a shoot down just outside of Tehran of a Ukrainian airliner with 57 Canadians on board. That really represented one of the peaks of tension in the region, and certainly tension from an Operation Impact perspective. And there was a period of relative calm being a very relative term in this region, until early March, when there were 2 more large-scale indirect fire attacks on the 11th and the 14th of March, which killed 3 members of the coalition and injured several others. Now, the 11th of March was actually the very day that the World Health Organization also declared COVID-19 to be a global pandemic. The combined factors of these large-scale indirect fire attacks and the threat posed by COVID-19 to not only the partner forces with whom we were involved, but also our own forces, led to a retrograde from Iraq, which I'll discuss in more detail later. In early May, the current Prime Minister al-Kadhimi, came into power in Iraq, and he has been very active over his first 3 months in office, and obviously striking a fine balance between what he needs to do for Iraq domestically and working with the various players on the foreign scene. And I'll talk a little bit about a strategic dialogue that's upcoming between him and the United States later on this month. COVID really for us presented a new reality and a new normal for how we had to conduct operations here. So May to July was what we call a relief in place. It was an extended relief in place to rotate all of the members of Operation Impact out of theater. And that had to be done all with our strategic airlift, so our C-17s, with our Airbuses, and then within theater with our tactical airlift, the CC-130 Hercules, because obviously there was no commercial air available to use. It also introduced some other planning factors, such as the requirement to self-isolate in Canada. So all of our members, before they arrive here, have self-isolated at the Canadian Armed Forces facility. And then for some of the countries within our operating area, there's also an additional requirement to do more self-isolation over here. So it's just been another planning factor that we've had to consider. I took command of Operation Impact and Operation Foundation from Brigadier General, I believe now Major General Mike St. Louis, on the 29th of May. And over the past few months, there have been some indirect fire attacks that have continued in Iraq. There has been great interest in an initial strategic dialogue that took place between the United States and Iraq at a lower level in early June. And then on the 20th of August, the Prime Minister Al-Kadhimi is actually traveling to Washington to meet with the President of the United States to continue the strategic dialogue that will cover security, will cover economic issues, health issues, and a myriad other issues. Sorry, I just have to pause for water because in order to keep the noise down, we've turned off the air conditioner, which I do not recommend doing in Kuwait. So the next slide here just shows some of the regional dynamics. We operate in Kuwait, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Bahrain, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, but we're obviously influenced by all of the other countries that are in the region. So I've listed, some of the dynamics that we pay attention to in the region, the ongoing issues between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Iran and Yemen, the tensions between the United States and Iran, the tensions between Israel and Iran, all of the issues that are happening in Syria. And then I'll just focus in on the last two there in terms of Daesh, because ultimately that was the reason why Operation Impact was established in 2014 and the effects of COVID. So Daesh, if you look back to 2014, Daesh controlled 110,000 square kilometers of territory in Iraq and Syria. And that amount of territory had 8 million people living in it. The physical caliphate has been defeated. Daesh does not control any territory in Iraq or Syria, and really they are considered a low-level insurgency. Does that mean they're never coming back? No, and that's exactly why support to the Iraqi security forces continues through Combined Joint Task Force Operation Inherent Resolve, and also why the NATO mission in Iraq is focusing so much on preparing the institutional level and the professional military education level of the Iraqi security forces to be a strong, self-sufficient army in security forces in the future. On COVID has affected absolutely everything that we do. So it certainly has had an effect on the coalition. It has had an effect on all of our partner forces. If you've been looking at the statistics throughout the region, I would say Iraq and Lebanon in particular have been hit very hard. It's had an impact on our movement. Earlier, I was discussing the added complexity of how we had to conduct our relief in place over the course of the summer. We've also had to keep very much cognizant of various curfews, and just like we see back in Canada, each of the countries has their own stages where certain things are open, certain things are still closed, and we have to be very aware of that. And it's also had an impact on the economies as it has in North America. So unemployment is up, oil is down, and it's challenging some already very challenged economic situations over here. So what I want to do now is spend a few minutes talking about what we do over here. So up at the top in the yellow box, you'll see what our mission is. And our mission is to enhance regional stability, and we really do that by in two ways. The first one is we build the capacity of partner forces, and the second one is that we integrate with coalition headquarters that are in the region. And we do that in order to ensure the Canadian Armed Forces enduring influence and access in the Middle East. And as you'll see in a couple of slides, all of this is nested within the Government of Canada's Middle East strategy. If you then just go to the figure entitled What We Do, this all fits under capacity building. So capacity building is by no means solely the military, as it says there. It's about governance, it's about security, it's about human capital, it's about development, it's about reconstruction. So within or underneath as subsets of capacity building, there's security sector reform, and that is something that NATO mission in Iraq is involved in. I'll be talking about that. And then security force capacity building is what the coalition was very much involved with, is still involved with, and what our forces in Jordan and Lebanon with our Canadian training assistance teams are still involved with. So specifically for capacity building, you can see on the other side of the slide where we do it. We do it in Lebanon with training, with mentoring, and with equipment donation. We do it in Jordan with, again, training, mentoring, equipment donation, and infrastructure. And we do it in Iraq by mentoring and equipment donation. You'll notice that I didn't say training in Iraq because that has been one of the changes that has taken place over this year. It has been 6 years now since the Iraqi security forces have been working with the Operation Inherent Resolve and now with the NATO training mission in Iraq. And the Iraqi security forces are very capable right now, and they are the ones who are leading the fight against Daesh. So it's really a different level at which both Operation Inherent Resolve and the NATO training mission in Iraq are now involved with. So there's some enablers, they're providing support to the Iraqi security forces, but then a lot of it is at the operational and at the strategic level where they're providing their support. We are not the only Canadian Armed Forces mission in the Middle East. So under Operation Impact and Operation Foundation, as I said, I have forces in Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and the Gulf countries of Bahrain, Qatar, and UAE, and then obviously here in Kuwait, where we have the headquarters. But we have Operation Proteus, which is our operation in the West Bank, where we're supporting the United States Security Coordinator, providing assistance to the Palestinian Authority security forces. We have Operation Calumet, which is a multinational force and observers in the Sinai Peninsula, which we've been involved with for a long time. We have, and then the last two operations that I'll mention are both United Nations operations. So there's Operation Jade, which provides support to the United Nations truce supervision in the region, and then Operation Snow Goose, which is the ongoing United Nations operation in Cyprus. On the other side of the slide shows the 4 pillars of Canada's Middle East engagement strategy, again, focused on the 4 countries of Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. So that dates back to 2016, when $3.5 billion was pledged over 5 years. And humanitarian assistance, development assistance, supporting diplomatic engagements, and then under the quadrant at the bottom, that would be the bottom left for me, the enhancing security and stabilization. So that includes our efforts on Operation Impact. As I said, I'd talk about the 2 major commands within Iraq, which I support. So they are commanded by the either NMI, the NATO mission in Iraq, or by Combined Joint Task Force Op Inherent Resolve. But I'm responsible for their national command and also for providing them national support. So as you can see, the NATO mission in Iraq, as I was saying earlier, is very much focused at the level where they're looking to strengthen national security and professional military education institutions. So if you think of an example like the Canadian Forces College in Toronto, that's the type of professional military education institute that they're putting some of their focus into now. And then the Combined Joint Task Force Operation Inherent Resolve, formed in 2014, stood up. It now numbers 77 nations to enable the military defeat of Daesh. And because of the success of the Iraqi security forces, the success of all of the countries that have contributed to the Operation Inherent Resolve over the last 6 years, as I said, now Daesh considered a low-level insurgency, but there is still some work to be done in terms of providing some support at the operational level, strategic level, and some enabler support as well. So where we do it within the 7 countries that I was mentioning, I'll start in the middle of the map there with Ali Al Salem Air Base, which is located probably about half an hour from Kuwait City. So we have my task force headquarters there, our Joint Intelligence Center, military police, our operational support hub, which, as I was mentioning, is what we built the mission around in 2014, as well as an air detachment. I'll get into a little bit more detail about each of those later. In Arifjan, about an hour and a half down the road, we have our Directorate of Strategic Communications. So earlier I mentioned our ministerial liaison team. It has evolved over the course of the past 4 years to where it is now the Directorate of Strategic Communications. So there's a Canadian Brigadier General there who is the point man for the United States 3-star general commanding the coalition for his strategic communications. We also have a number of our embeds there and a liaison officer. If we move north to Iraq, the number of places where we currently have Canadians has shrunk considerably, and that's part of the overall campaign plan of Operation Inherent Resolve. So for example, the base in Besmaya was turned over in July. That was the latest example. A number of other bases were turned over earlier this year. So now we have Op Impact forces in Baghdad at 2 locations at Union 3, which is right downtown. That's where both the headquarters for the NATO mission in Iraq and the Operation Inherent Resolve are located, and also at the Baghdad Diplomatic Support Center. We have a liaison officer there to help us out with both personnel and equipment that are coming into theater. Up in Erbil in the north of the country, we have, again, forward detachment of our operational support hub. We have a couple of dentists who, if you haven't seen our Facebook or Twitter page, I highly recommend it. They did a very entertaining video to show how their job and how their role has changed in the COVID environment. And as well there, we also have some embeds working with the coalition. Within Jordan and Lebanon, we have our Canadian Training Assistance teams. I'll be talking about those in more detail. And then in Bahrain, in Qatar, and in the United Arab Emirates. And again, I'll be giving a bit more detail on each of those locations. I wanted to show you this slide just to show you some of the demographics across Operation Impact and Operation Foundation. So if I was to take the median, I think that's the right term, but if I was to take the median, what a member of Operation Impact Operation Foundation would look like, well, they're young to me. They're between 25 to 35 years of age. They're on their first or their second tour representing the Canadian Armed Forces. They're from the Army. So as you can see, 74% of the forces here are from the Army, which is a marked change from the early years of the mission. And it has waxed and waned over the course of the nearly 6 years. They're male. We have 10% women within our task force, heavily concentrated in some areas. So for example, our Joint Intelligence Center has a very strong number of women working in it. And in fact, the commanding officer of our Joint Intelligence Center is a fantastic officer by the name of Laura Williams from Kingston, who's doing a great job and leading some great intelligence professionals there. They are junior, so I think there's been some missions, particularly in the capacity building, where there's been a lot of senior people involved and not a lot of junior people. With the mission that we have, with the responsibility for providing support across those 7 countries, we are still primarily junior NCMs, privates, corporals, and master corporals, and then as you can see, goes down a little bit as we go through the senior NCOs, officers, and onwards and upwards. Regular force, we do have some reserve force personnel, 10% of the task force. And again, I just ask you to keep in mind that that's a snapshot in time from the current force that we have over here. So I'm going to take the next few minutes to go over the units that we have operating under both Joint Task Force Impact and Task Force Central. So the first one, as I said, the Operational Support Hub is really the foundation upon which Op Impact was established. Their job has gotten more difficult over the years because now our joint operating area encompasses 7 countries, and they don't stop there because they are also responsible as the regional support hub to providing support to some of those other missions which I showed you on a previous slide, and as well as being ready to react to any other missions which the Canadian Armed Forces or the Government of Canada, any other tasks which I might assign them in the area. They were very much involved with the retrograde that happened over March and April. In fact, here at Ali El Salem, that went from a capacity of 800 to housing over 875. And they've also done some incredible work keeping the force safe here over the last few months by designing COVID self-isolation and isolation facilities. Next one I'll show, the next two I'll show are Canadian training assistance teams in Jordan and in Lebanon. So in Jordan, supporting the Jordanian Armed Forces, and in Lebanon, supporting the Lebanese Armed Forces. And in both of those countries, really the focus is on helping them thicken their border with Syria. So some of the things that we do in Jordan, there's persistent mentoring of combat service support, both at the brigade and at the battalion level. We also have a female engagement team, which I'll be providing a vignette for a little bit later. We have some episodic training in chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear training, some forward air controller training, and logistics officers. And I'll discuss some of the infrastructure projects a little bit later on as well. For Lebanon, similarly, there's some episodic training that we do, which includes combat first aid. We do basic winter operations, which might not be the first thing that you think about when you think about the Middle East, but there's some mountains in Lebanon where we help them train. It's for the Land Force Border Regiment, and bring some of the skills which we're very good at in Canada over to the Lebanese Armed Forces. So we work on both basic and advanced winter operations, and as well, believe it or not, with snowmobile training. And we also have some persistent mentoring ongoing there with the logistics and the sustainment system of the Lebanese Armed Forces. We're also involved in both of the countries. I didn't mention it for Jordan, but in donating some equipment, and in Lebanon, some of that donated equipment has included snowmobiles. Our air detachment. So there was a pause for some of the forces within Joint Task Force Impact and Task Force Central over the past few months, but there was definitely no pause. There was no pause for the Operational Support Hub, and this is one of the other organizations that has been busy throughout. They have been absolutely critical to us in a COVID environment. As I said, with no commercial air, the requirement to deploy forces across those 7 countries in the joint operations area, they have been working exceptionally hard, and they're also a critical support to the coalition. So it's not only Canadian personnel and Canadian equipment that they transport, they also provide support to both the Operation Inherent Resolve forces and the NATO training mission in Iraq. What else do we have in Kuwait here? We have my ability to exercise national command and national support across the theater. So my task force headquarters is here, and that's really to provide information back up to my higher headquarters, which is the Canadian Joint Operations Command in Ottawa, across, so working with NATO training mission in Iraq and Operation Inherent Resolve, also working with our various embassies, our ambassadors, and our Canadian Defense Attaches in the region, and then down with the units which I've been mentioning. Here we have our Joint Intelligence Center, who are providing fused intelligence. There has been a change in the way that we've manned that, and there's been some more reliance on reach back and some more of the skill sets that have been sent back to Ottawa, just as part of the evolution over the past couple of years. And then we also have our military police who are not only here, but going across the joint operating area. So I mentioned Task Force Central Op Foundation. These forces came under command of the headquarters here in early April, and it was basically a common sense decision because previously they had been reporting to our detachment at the U.S. Central Command headquarters in Tampa, Florida. So now, as opposed to a very busy liaison officer down in Central Command taking care of forces 7 time zones away, we have a very capable headquarters here, fully manned to provide the national command and national support to forces who are working in Bahrain with the combined maritime force and the United Nations, the United States Navy Central Command in Qatar with the combined air operations center, and in the United Arab Emirates in Abu Dhabi with the air control for the coalition. So I've talked a lot about who we are and what we do. I do want to say that there's a couple things that we are not. So we are not a combat mission, and we are not a counterterrorism mission. So my line of effort for Op Impact and Op Foundation, we are not that. But we do definitely contribute to that, because by contributing to Combined Joint Task Force Operation Inherent Resolve, by contributing to the NATO mission in Iraq, and by helping out our partner forces in Jordan and Lebanon and contributing to those key allied and coalition headquarters, we are preventing terrorism within the region, and we are preventing the reemergence of Daesh and helping to enhance and maintain regional stability. And I'm going to illustrate a few vignettes about some of the things that we have been doing, and that very proud of the members of the task force who have been involved with that. So the first one is the retrograde, which I was mentioning earlier. So due to both the security situation and the global pandemic, all training ceased, just like it did in Canada, ceased in Iraq back in the month of March. So a decision was made, and followed by many of our other like-minded partners, to relocate all of our people, not all of them, but to relocate a large number of our people and our equipment from Iraq in March and April. So as you can see, over the course of 25 days, over 250 passengers, over 500,000 pounds of cargo, 107 aircraft pallets, which even an infantry officer knows is a lot. We moved our helicopters out of the area, and over $8 million worth of equipment and material. And really the work didn't stop when it came out, because we do have to be very cognizant of resource stewardship and of being responsible to the Canadian taxpayer. So work has been ongoing, and in fact was just finalized last week, where we have gone through very deliberately to make sure that we can account for all of the equipment that we had in Iraq and that we retrograded out of there. The next one I want to talk about is an example of how we're helping thicken the border in Jordan, and that's 2 major projects. One which has been completed, was completed in February of this year, and that was helping out with construction on a border road. And when I say helping out, that's the government of Canada providing money. So 62 kilometers, which will provide them with much quicker ability to react to any issues which occur along the border with Syria. And now construction has started on a border tower. So in the background of that photo, you can see an example of one of the border towers, and we're now involved in 11 towers over the next couple of years being upgraded, again, just to enhance the capability of the Jordanian armed forces along the border with Syria. So I'm going to talk specifically about the female engagement team, but through our capacity building efforts in both Jordan and Lebanon, we're helping to promote greater awareness for gender equality and increase support for the implementation of a gender perspective in military operations. So our support to Jordan includes enhancing the role of women in critical incident response capabilities with the Jordanian Armed Forces. So it's referred to as the Female Engagement Team. It's about a platoon-sized organization within the Jordanian Armed Forces. And we've had some fantastic women in uniform who have been involved in helping out with the training and the mentoring there. And it's really getting a good foothold in the Jordanian Armed Forces. And in Lebanon, we're providing training to members of the Lebanese border regiments on gender-sensitive tactical, medical, and response capabilities. In terms of statistics, because I know that or metrics, that was one of the questions that I saw earlier this week. Since 2018, which was really when we put the focus on capacity building for this mission, 4,500 plus members of the Iraqi security forces, almost 1,500 members of the Lebanese armed forces, and 900 members of the Jordanian armed forces in the areas that I've been talking about and that are contained on the slide. I truly believe that we are having an impact in building a foundation in the Middle East, to use a clever play on words. And we're doing that, I think, at all three levels. So strategic, as I said, we are aligning the Government of Canada priorities with our partners as part of Canada's Middle East engagement strategy. At the operational level, we are involved in capacity building in the Middle East. And tactically, I can tell you, this is my 5th tour, there is nothing that brings you more pride as a Canadian than watching our soldiers, sailors, and aviators in action on operations. They are the true Team Canada, and they are the best representatives and ambassadors for Canada that we can ask for. And to see them in action, especially under conditions which are stressful, it's stressful anytime, but when there's the added stress of Canada also being under the same COVID conditions, to see what they do on a daily basis is awe-inspiring, and definitely keeps somebody who has just celebrated his 30th year in uniform motivated and ready to come to work every day. I'll just take a couple minutes to identify what I think are a couple of opportunities and challenges. So one of the greatest opportunities is the ability to work as a whole of government and part of a whole of government team here, and with a very clearly defined Middle East engagement strategy with the 4 pillars that you saw. So that hasn't always been the case, but I think that over the past 5 years, there's been some great work done, and we'll see where that goes in the future. We're also doing our part to provide stability in a region that very much needs it. And if you just go back to the regional dynamics slide, I think that speaks to that. What are the challenges? I don't think I can say enough. The challenge of COVID. I will show you that only because Jean-Francois is 6 feet away am I not wearing my mask, but we all have our non-medical masks. Obviously our medical personnel here, because we do have a strong medical team, have the full personal protective equipment for our medical forces. But it has changed, as it has in Canada. It has changed everything that we do, and we now have to make sure that planning for COVID and planning for a COVID environment is part of everything that we do. And the second challenge is, again, just refer to the regional dynamic slide. It's dynamic at the best of times, and there are events that occur like last week's tragedy in Beirut, which further complicate an already complicated situation. So that completes the formal presentation part of my discussion here, but I'd be happy to take any of the questions that you have prepared.
Sure. Thank you so much for that presentation. I have to say, one of the first things I was really struck by was one of your initial slides, which is how much has happened in just a short amount of time in the region. It's quite remarkable. It felt like the incidents that happened in Iran last year, it feels like it was a really long time ago, but then I know it's on your timeline, it was November and December that all of that seemed to happen, which is just quite unreal to think about. I was also really struck by the amount of work that you've been able to do with the Canadian Armed Forces and the amount of capacity building that's going on. And this kind of leads into the first question, which is, what would you say Operation Impact's greatest success has been, and why?
Yeah, so I'd break it into two. I think the first part is the success of the coalition. Canada has been a big contributor to that. So Canada has been a contributor. Again, I'm not going to talk to what the Special Operations Forces have been doing, but they've been here since 2014. Our initial contribution of the air-centric, the fighters, the CP-140 and the air-to-air refueler was critical, part of the coalition, and their effort to dislodge and start the defeat of degrading and then ultimately defeat of Daesh. And then we've also been able to adapt as the mission has adapted itself. So in terms of changing our focus within the operation, where we were providing a lot of trainers, where we're now providing some staff officers in some key positions, and also our ability to shift over, because Operation Inherent Resolve and NATO mission in Iraq are very much two organizations that work together, because the work that Operation Inherent Resolve has been doing is setting the stage for what NATO has been doing and will continue to do in Iraq. So that's the first one that I'd say. The second one is, as I mentioned, it is truly a whole of government strategy here. And to be able to see that and to be able to be part of that is great, because so I've a graduate of the National Security Program at the Canadian Forces College in Toronto. And one of the things we always talk about is, well, we need whole of government. We need, there needs to be, it can never be just a military solution. And I think we're seeing actually one of the big success stories and great examples for Canada here.
And that, you sort of talked about NATO a little bit there. So how do you think Operation Impact is actually helping to maintain sort of the rules-based international order in the Middle East? How do you see your role in that?
So again, I'd go back to the Government of Canada's Middle East engagement strategy, because we are engaging with regional, bilateral, and multilateral partners. So we're helping drive positive action on some issues such as strengthening global peace and security, promoting the rule of law. And then, as I said, if you look at what we're doing in both Jordan and Lebanon, advancing gender equality in areas that have been affected by Daesh. So I think all of our efforts, and again, going back to the larger umbrella of the Government of Canada's Middle East engagement strategy, it upholds the rules-based international order.
Great. And then sort of my last question, which you alluded to in your presentation, was about metrics. And you talked a little bit about one of the metrics you look at is a number of members who have been trained. Are there any other impact metrics that you keep track of, or that are just as significant as that metric?
So I'd say that is the metric for op impact. But I can tell you that both for CJTFOIR, the coalition, and NATO training mission in Iraq, they keep track very much, and they have very well-defined measures of effectiveness and measures of performance, which have allowed them to make the decisions that were made earlier this year to change the focus from tactical level training to more at the operational and the strategic level. So because when we're talking about what we're doing within Iraq, I'm more providing the national command and national support and the awareness of the region back to Canada. It's really within Iraq, the metrics of the coalition and of the NATO training mission in Iraq that we rely on there. And with Jordan and Lebanon, I'd say, again, I might be a bit of a broken record here, but going back to the whole of government, because our report just provides part of the report that is going up from the ambassadors in the region for the overall Team Canada effect in those countries.
Right, so you're just like a piece of this whole sort of mission that's going on. Yeah, that's really good to know. I know we're kind of pressed for time, so I guess we'll move on to the questions from Summer.
Thanks, Victoria. Sir, wonderful presentation. And so my first question to you is, how was Operation Impact affected in the weeks following the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, and how the mission has evolved since then?
Right, so, okay, absolutely. Sorry, those were the two parts?
That's the two parts.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So initially, there was obviously a great deal of discussion in Ottawa and in all of the other capitals of the coalition as to how this changed the mission, how it affected it. There was some movement of forces that was done in January. specifically from an operation impact perspective, what it made us look at were our force protection measures. So we made sure that all of the areas that we work, including in Kuwait, had enhanced force protection measures and enhanced personal protection for all of our members who are deployed over here. As I said earlier, that lasted a few weeks, but then there was a period of relative calm in February before the other strikes in March. And that leads me to the second part of your question about how the mission has evolved. So because of not only the threat of indirect fire, but also COVID, and where the overall coalition campaign plan was located, or was situated in terms of the campaign that they've been working on for the past 5+ years, that's when the determination was made to move away from tactical level training and to focus on operational and strategic level.
Sorry, I actually missed a step there. I was supposed to turn it over to Robert to actually introduce Summer. So Robert, sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure that those who are listening know Samar Khurshid. He is one of our research analysts at the NATO Association and a terrific member of our team. The questions he's coming up with for you, General, were taken from the rest of our intern crew at the NATO Association. So just wanted to say that. Samar, I think you have one or two more?
Pretty much one more, but the General briefly touched on it in the last question. How has the current pandemic affected impact?
I'll just actually give you a few examples. So as I said, first of all, our medical team here has all of the personal protective equipment that they require. And again, I'll put in a plug for the Twitter and Facebook video of our dental team in Erbil, because you'll see exactly what they've done there. But it's also affected everything that we do in terms of having to be much more deliberate in our planning, having to know what's happening in each of those 7 countries for restrictions, and also how we can maintain the morale and welfare of our members over here well in a COVID environment. So how can we still, we work hard, but we can't work 24/7. We are on 24/7, but we can't expect everyone to work 24/7. So physical fitness is very important. It's great for our physical resiliency and also our mental resiliency. So our gym actually opened well before any of the gyms opened back in Canada. It's with strict COVID measures. There's regular cleaning. There's a limit on the number of people. So that's a good example there. And on Canada Day, for example, we were able to have a small celebration here in Kuwait. And we did a COVID-friendly ball hockey game, because you can't have a Canada Day without playing some ball hockey. And so we did a ball hockey game that looked a little bit like a tabletop hockey game. Everyone was going in lanes that were laid out by different colored tape, and were staying 6 feet away. And if they didn't stay 6 feet away, they went to the penalty box.
That must have been quite fun.
It was.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Samar. And General, that kind of brings us to one of the last things I wanted to ask you, which is what is one image that you wish that Canadians could see of Operation Impact, actually in action?
Yeah, so I'm not going to choose one image. I'd take those 4 vignettes that I showed you,
right?
Because I think, the massive effort that went into the retrograde and relocation. I'd show you the female engagement team. I'd show you the great work that's been done in Jordan along the border road and those border towers. And I'd show you the winter warfare training, because again, I think that's a great story.
Yeah, snowmobiles.
But now you're making me, I have 2 sons, and I can't choose a favorite son. And it's now you're asking me to choose, with so many great things happening here, it's difficult to choose.
Fair enough.
But I think those are some 4 great examples.
Yeah, for sure. And you already did show them to us with great aplomb, including referencing people to that dental video, which I highly recommend as pretty outstanding piece of public affairs. So General, I've got to say, I really appreciate everything you're doing. We want to make sure that you know that Canada appreciates everything that Operation Impact does, projecting security and making sure that other countries have the kind of peace, stability, and prosperity that we have in Canada is something that Canada has been dedicated to for so long, and you are the spitting image of it, sir, and thanks so much. It's really an absolute pleasure to talk with you today.
Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. You
Cheers,
too.
General. And thanks so much, Victoria and Samer, for helping with the questions.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria and Samer.
If you're interested to get more involved in the NATO Association, we do put on weekly Zoom calls now during COVID. We engage on social media, and we have a terrific membership, a community of Canadians who care about the value of security, the importance of NATO, and the key role that the rules-based international order serves for all of our lives. Thanks so much, and good day.